So I am so pleased to introduce Lisa Ann Edwards, who is a leading expert in the field of coaching. She is a noted author of over 15 articles. And what she has done is to identify the measurable spaces that are often unmeasurable in coaching, in terms of influence, in terms of the benefits of coaching. And she has designed over 70 tools that coaches can utilize to measure the return on investment of coaching. And I'm very anxious to see what she's going to share with us so that we can include it into our coaching practice. So welcome, Lisa. We are so glad to have you and to learn more about ROI of coaching.
All right. Thank you very much, Karen. And hello, everyone from beautiful Seattle, Washington, which is where I'm based. I think you're going to see the sun come up behind me, or maybe actually you'll see the fog disappear and some light will break through eventually. But I'm so excited to be here with you today, especially during this week, International Coaching Week. And I think it's a good touchstone for all of us to have to reconnect with the purpose of why we're all in this work that we do together. I know every single coach that I've ever met always has an interesting story about how they got into coaching. Usually it has something to do with some personal passion or mission or desire to help others. And many of us did completely different work before we ever came into coaching. And I think this week in particular is a great week for us to acknowledge what motivates us and what keeps us passionate about this work. So I'm really delighted to be here during this week, especially with you. So here's what we're headed into today. I've got an agenda for us. I'm going to start off just by hearing a little bit about you. And then I will talk about our overall process model. How do we help you get from A to Z when it comes to measuring ROI? ROI is actually just one number. So it's one number of many things that we look at in our entire process, but I'll talk about that in our high-level process model. Then I'm going to bring it all to life for you through a case study. This is a recent case study that we completed last year that includes some group coaching as well as some learning elements and some one-on-one coaching. I'll share that with you and talk about the ROI piece on that as well. Then we'll talk about the money talk, which is the all-important conversation that we have to have with either our prospective clients or with our individual coaching clients to help them connect coaching goals like they want to communicate better, they want greater work-life balance, they want to be less stressed. How do we connect that to a monetary value? So I'll talk about how we do that when we get to the Money Talk framework. And then finally, we'll wrap up with some of your takeaways. So this is what we're headed into. I want to start off by learning just a little bit about you and sort of what your thinking is around ROI of coaching. So in the chat box, you should be able to open up the chat box. And I'd love for you to type in there, when you think about ROI of coaching, what are you hoping you will gain? In other words, what do you think the benefits might be of measuring return on investment of coaching? So you can type in chat and maybe Karen will help me see some of your responses.
Absolutely. So some perspectives and info on how to use this with clients, being able to answer the organization's doubts about the value of the investment, making behavioral change measurable, an answer for the skeptics, demonstrate value and impact. The client's employer wants to know how much more money can they make from the coaching. Being comfortable talking about it with sponsors, since companies are always looking at ROI. What is the motivation and justification for companies seeking coaching, particularly above the senior exec line? Helping clients understand coaching benefits. The coachee's point of view, I'm putting in my time to see a positive change for myself. The organization is spending money to see the change in behaviors. So is the spend worth it?
All right. Very good.
Yeah.
I love seeing your responses because so much has evolved since I first started talking about this topic with other people. I actually got into this work because I had developed a program called Bloom Where You're Planted, Finding Purpose in Your Work and Life. And I thought it was a little bit of a fluffy program, but what I noticed was that people came to the program thinking they were in the wrong job, and once they went through the program, they realized they were in the right job. And so I started to have this feeling that, oh, I think this might be a way to help retain people in organizations. This is way back in 1999, by the way. And I took that program to an organization and I did a pilot study with it, and track things like retention to see how we could see return on investment. But I really started to think about this in a more professional way when I joined an organization here in Seattle where I live. And at that time, all of our senior executives had executive coaches. Even our CEO had an executive coach. We had 22 senior executives. Every single one of them had an executive coach. In our industry, not long after I joined that organization, our industry, the media industry, started to go through huge upheaval. And we had to make some serious decisions about budget. So you know what I'm about to say next, which is we cut coaching from the organization. And I thought that it was really interesting because it seemed to me that more than any other time, our senior executives would need executive coaches to help them with the huge challenges that we were facing as an organization. So what I found out from my manager, head of HR, is while they loved coaching, they loved the coaching experience, they loved their coach, they loved the conversation, they couldn't see how it was positively impacting the bottom line. And so because of that, it was taken out of the organization. Well, I was able to bring coaching back to the organization. The way that I did it was I ran a coaching program almost under the radar, but I ran a coaching program in that organization where I was the coach. I coached I think 11 people, and tracked all of the success of that program, including the ROI, shared it back with the CFO when I was all done. And she said to me, you know, Lisa, I think your ROI is even higher than what you're representing here. And so as a result of that work, I ended up winning a very large budget to continue to run development programs. So executive development programs, leadership development programs, new hire orientation, sales programs, and so on. I did that for 6 years at a time when our business continued to go through huge upheaval. We went through at least 13 headcount reductions while I worked in that organization. People's project budgets got cut, and yet in spite of that, I was able to retain a budget. To the point that when I left the organization, I've got a picture here. This is my last leadership development program that I ran in that organization. This is me right here. You'll notice somebody who might look familiar to you right here. That's Bill Gates in the center there. He owned the business. He's since sold the business. But, you know, doing that work really changed my life, and it helped me see the value of being able to have data and evidence to illustrate the impact that you're making to an organization. It had a real big impact for me. So I'm so excited to share some of what I've learned along the way with you, because my hope is that it helps you in some of the ways that it's helped me as well. Let's talk about why it's so important today. I think this topic has become more and more popular over the years and more relevant. I think when I first started talking about this topic, there was quite a bit more skepticism than there is today. I think it's so important today for three main reasons. And the first reason is best illustrated by this quote that you see on the slide here. It comes from Inc. magazine. And essentially what it's saying is, there are no barriers to being a coach. Anybody can be a coach. And while there are certification organizations, ultimately, there's nothing preventing anybody from deciding that they're going to set up a coaching practice today. And because of that, it makes it even more important for us to be able to demonstrate to prospective clients why they should invest in us. So I think the number one reason why you want to be able to demonstrate the impact of your work is to help you win budget or win business. It might be another way to think about it. The second biggest reason is this one. Now, nobody ever likes to think that this might happen. No one ever likes to think their budget might get cut or that any of their client projects might get cut midway through, but it does happen. It's, it certainly happened to me in the very beginning. That's how I came into the work. And while nobody likes to think about this, it is true. Here's a quote from somebody who is a good friend of mine and was writing to me to let me know that their entire leadership coaching program had been cut in their organization because they couldn't see the value of that program. Now, you might be reading this and you might think, okay, well, maybe they're not a very sophisticated business or they're not a very mature business. This is actually a $96 billion company with 156,000 employees. Very sophisticated business, very innovative business, and yet they couldn't see the overall impact and value of their coaching program, so they cut it. So that's really the second reason, is to keep your budget or your business within your client. Also expand and grow your business within your clients. Be able to have the evidence that allows you to do that. So finally, there was one more reason. This is actually an old reason. This comes from a 2009 ICF coaching study. They asked people at that time, they asked the people who hire coaches, what is your selection criteria for hiring a coach? And the number one selection criteria at that time was what I think of as coach chemistry. It's this cluster up here of coach's confidence, personal rapport, personal compatibility. I think of that as the coach chemistry. So in 2009, that was the number one selection criteria. I think it's still a foundation today, but even back in 2009, all the way down here at the bottom, you'll see the second biggest selection criteria is effectiveness of coaching process. So in other words, having data and evidence to demonstrate the effectiveness of your work is key to the marketplace. The marketplace is asking for it. The marketplace has been asking for it since 2009, at least according to this study. And so when you have that available to share with your prospective clients, you become known as the expert in your market. You become known as the go-to coach in your area. So there you have it, 3 reasons why I think this is so critical today. And now what I'd love to do is to hear from you. So of those 3 reasons, I'd love to hear from you, and you can type in chat, which are most important to you? And in fact, if you have anything additional to add, I'm happy to see that as well. So let's have you type in chat, what's most important to you?
Would you also like to hear from people, or you want to just
Sure.
in the chat? So Magna, you have someone that has raised their hand. Do you want to give them an opportunity? And we're getting a lot of 3s.
A lot of 3s.
Mm-hmm. 1 and 3.
Mm-hmm. Good. I love it. I think they're sort of connected in a way, especially 3. I think when you stand out, you know, when you stand apart from the competition, it makes it much easier for you to win budget or grow your budget. But a big part of what I'm hearing you say is stand out. You know, something I didn't put up here, but I think it's a big value. It's sort of a hidden value, but I think of this as really where the gold is. And that is the data and evidence helps you see how to make your work even better. And to me, that's where the gold is. And a lot of people don't talk about that from this approach. But that is really a big key value that you can then share back with your client, because now you have the evidence to know what makes your program better, and you can back that up with your data and evidence.
Now here's one, not to be replaced by AI.
Oh my gosh,
Artificial intelligence.
I know it. I know it. I hear you on that one. Our industry is changing a lot. You know, you see all these other industries that become commoditized over time, and certainly, I imagine there's some people that are here today that are also thinking about the commoditization of our profession as well, and how we might be, replaced by AI, or, this whole idea that anybody can be a coach and it's just about matching people up. And so, the pressure's definitely there. There are definitely things that are happening. But again, I love the idea here, the more data and evidence that you have to demonstrate the substance and the value that you offer, I think the less likely that that's going to negatively impact you. So all kinds of great responses from all of you. Let's talk a little bit about our process model. So admittedly, our model is about 50% evaluation. In other words, about half of the model is about the data, but half of the model, 50% of the model is really about business development. It is admittedly a business development tool. It allows you not only to help you win new business, keep or grow your existing business, stand out and get known as the expert, and then it also gives you the data to understand how you do develop your business. In other words, how do you make your programs better? So I'm not going to walk through every single step, but let me just share with you the 4 main phases. So the first phase in our process model is really the selling or the influencing phase. That's where you're speaking in business terms that help your prospective client understand the value that you can offer to them and begin to understand what are the issues that you're facing so that you can design a coaching solution that's going to best serve their needs. So that's the selling phase. The middle phase is the invest phase. So at that stage, you've sold your project, your client is investing. And in our process, we're not just collecting data. We're actually looking at what do you need to do to set up your program for success so that you do see the impacts that you're looking for. The analogy I often use is we're not taking a tax auditor approach here. We're really taking a tax planner approach. What do you have to do to make sure that you're set up for success? We talk about things like the characteristics of the individual, the characteristics of the overall solution that you've designed, and the work environment that they go back into, that your clients go back into. We spend quite a bit of time talking about this in some of the work that we do or the training that we do around this approach. How do you make sure that you're set up for success? Finally, in the third phase, that's where you've got all of your data and evidence. It's about organizing it, putting it together, and then putting it back in a report, which is in stage 4, and in phase 4. And in phase 4, we not only think about sharing the report back, but really the bigger, broader benefit of all of this work is that it gives you a final report that you can then repurpose in multiple case studies. In other words, if you're running a program of 10 or 12 coaching participants, by the end, when you have your final report, you might be able to repurpose that report in anywhere from 3 to 6 different case studies. So for example, one of my final reports for a client, it's a mentor coaching program. I can repurpose that case study as a mentor coaching program in a sales organization or in a millennial workforce, or as a program to retain employees, or as a program to speed the onboarding process of salespeople, because we did all of those things in that final report. And any one of those is a great story all by itself, and it's supported by evidence and data. So that's really the big benefit at the end. I want to talk about the ROI because surprisingly, I find that people have different understandings of ROI. I have come to see over the years, I've come to identify ROI in different terms. So I think of a financial ROI, which is really the way the term was intended. And I also think of non-financial ROI. So non-financial ROI to me are things like behavior change happened, the team is happier, the individual is less stressed out. So to me, I think of that as non-financial ROI, and I think of that as all positive. But I also think of this concept of financial ROI, which is where the term comes from. So it's actually a finance term. This comes straight from Wikipedia. I think this is a really great example that illustrates how the math works. So essentially imagine this person named Frank invests $1,000 in a technology company in 2014. He sells his shares a year later for $1,200. So how do we calculate the ROI? Well, the actual formula is listed here. So this is the amount that he sold it for, less the cost of his investment divided by the cost of his investment. And then it's always represented as a percentage. So here it's saying 20%. So what that means is for every dollar that Frank invested in this technology firm, he got 20 cents back after he takes all of his costs for that investment into consideration. Pretty good ROI, 20%, it's not that bad. If you invested today in the stock market and you saw 20%, I don't know, it goes up and down so much recently. I don't know if you'd be happy about that or disappointed by that, but it's not a bad ROI. I think the trick for us is we have to put, how do we put the work that we're doing in coaching into this kind of financial terms? And the key for us is all around the money talk. I'm going to be talking about that framework a little bit later. And essentially what the money talk conversation does is it's very, very similar to a coaching contracting conversation. In fact, you could argue actually that 4 of the steps are very similar to a coaching contracting conversation, but there's one additional step that we take, and that is to pinpoint the monetary value that is the result of the ripple effect of the change that that person is hoping for. I'll talk through that and provide a couple of examples when we get to that a little bit later. So let me bring this all to life for you through a case study. This is a case study that we completed last year. It was for an organization that was interested in becoming known as the destination employer within this organization, becoming the destination employer for women. The leader of this team is a man, and he knows that the more diversity he has on his team, the more diversity in backgrounds and the more diversity of thought he has on his team, the greater innovation they will have as an output. So he really gets that concept. Plus, he's just an all-around good guy, and he wants to make it a great place to work for everybody. So he was very focused on how could he create an environment for women on his team. So this case study is all about an intervention, a program that was run in this organization to help develop the women on his team, or some of the women on his team, 12 women, in fact. It's not actually my program. I partnered together with a leadership development firm who was bringing this work to that organization. The name of that firm is Human. It's run by Mitch Shepard, wonderful, dynamic woman who has some fantastic programs on diversity and inclusion. So I partnered together with her on this. So the actual work that they did, the development work, is not my work. It's just the measures that I helped her capture. So let's talk a little bit about how this work began. I actually came into this program after they had agreed on how they were implementing the solution, the overall development solution. I was able to identify who are the stakeholders of this program. In other words, who are all the people who have something to gain or lose as a result of the success or failure. Identified those people here, and then found various ways to capture data and insights. You can see that illustrated on this, what I call this stakeholder map. And then the next set of slides are going to be a couple of the slides that come from the final report. It's not all of the slides. I have permission to share this with you. By the way, I also have this available as a case study. I'll share the link for you in terms of where you can download that if you want to take a peek at the case study in narrative format. But I'm going to share just a couple of slides with you to illustrate the success of this program, and also how we illustrated the success of this program with data and evidence. So this is an overview of the set of the slides. This is a table of contents of the final report. I'll walk through some of the slides for each one of these sections. So the first one is the executive summary. This is actually what is shared with the client. So we share a dashboard or an overview of the results that we saw. In this dashboard, the results are represented by timing of data collection. So we collect the data at the start of the program through one-on-one interviews. That's where I'm learning about their level of motivation and commitment. I'm learning about their sense of the overall solution. I'm learning about their sense of the work environment. In other words, are we set up for success for this program? Are we going to see the kind of impact that we're looking for? So I capture data around that in the one-on-one interviews. I also ask them about their individual goals for the program, and we have the money talk conversation to see how well we can start to connect their goals to some type of monetary value. We also capture data midway through the program. So at the midpoint, we capture data, make sure we're on track for success. What are they gaining from the program? And then we capture data at the end of the program as well. I meet with them. We capture data online, but then I also meet with them one-on-one to reflect back on those original conversations I had with them to see what happened for them. What was the overall result? And do we have any monetary values that we can share? So this is a high-level summary of the results, pretty strong results. I'll walk through a couple of the slides that illustrate some of the data that you see represented here on this dashboard. Another thing that we report back are the top 10 ways that the women grew. You can see the top 10 are listed here on this slide. The ones that are the most significant from a data perspective, in other words, the data or the averages, illustrate that these are noteworthy points of growth for this women. Those are represented by stars. So what you can see here is that they gain clarity on things like their own individual values, personal growth, their inner critic. They took leaps. That was an action that they took, and they amplified the contributions of others. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that as we go a little bit further here. We also, of course, captured data that helped shared some insights about what we could do to make the program even better in the next implementation. So we had a lot of data that illustrated to us that they actually would benefit from more one-on-one coaching. So we made a wonderful business case to illustrate why these women would benefit from more coaching. So that was a recommendation we made. By the way, that's what they're doing this year. So we concluded this program last year, and they actually reinvested for this year and added some additional coaching. We also recommended having more mentors within the organization for these women in particular. And we also made some recommendations on some of the ways that the micro-learning was shared with the women. By the way, right here at the bottom right-hand corner, I've got this on a few slides. This is where you can download a narrative of the case study if you want a little bit more information about it. Let me share with you a little bit of insight from some of the initial interviews. So we capture data around what attracted them to the organization. That helps us understand the context in which they're working and how much they feel connected to that environment. That's really insight for us in terms of helping us understand what is going to be their ability to make change. Are they in work environments where they feel they belong and they feel supported, because that plays into their ability to do things differently once they go back into their work environment. I mentioned to you that part of what I capture is I ask them about their individual learning goals, and I ask them about the ripple effect using the Money Talk conversation, and I start to pinpoint, where do we think we might see a monetary value? We don't actually land on any monetary values in those initial interviews, but I start to help them make a connection. Essentially what I'm doing is I'm priming them for the conversation that we're going to have at the end, so that we actually do see monetary impact at the end. So this is a summary of one of those slides from notes. I mentioned to you that we capture data on some of the, I call them levers of success. In other words, we want to know that they're set up for success. So do they have the motivation and sense of self-efficacy that they need to have to really make an impact? Do they feel that the solution is designed to meet their individual needs? What's missing? Are the elements there to help give them feedback on their progress along the way, and so on? And then we also capture data around the overall work environment. So this slide is just one slide from some of that data. This one is about their individual motivation and self-efficacy. You'll see the items down here at the bottom. And what stood out for us at this time is we noticed that they were saying, on average, we didn't have a lot of strength around it would be easy for them to make things happen, or that they had the tools to solve the problems that we face. So actually, after the initial interviews, I started to make the recommendation that they would benefit from some additional coaching. So what this says to me is they're really motivated. You can see their level of motivation. Their interest is high, but they're not quite sure they're going to be able to overcome some of the obstacles that they face. And that usually speaks to me of having some one-on-one conversation, a place to have a sounding board where they can think about some of the concepts and then what they can do personally to overcome those challenges. We capture data at the midpoint, and so I'll share what we learned at the midpoint. What we learned at the midpoint is that 100% of all of these topics where they had some conversation in the group coaching, they had a little bit of micro-learning, they gained at least some clarity on 100% of all of those topics. There were 9 topics by the midpoint. So that was really great progress for us to see. At the midpoint, we also saw that they were taking leaps and communicating more authentically. So we saw some growth in that area as well. And then by the final survey, what we saw was, again, a lot of strength all throughout the program. And by the end point, we saw a slight difference in terms of what actions they were taking. So they were taking leaps, which was great, and they were amplifying the contributions of others. So we're going to talk about that a little bit more when I get into the monetary values. I want to share with you some of the monetary values. So this is one slide of 6 slides around monetary values. And you remember me saying that at the end of the program, I go back in the one-on-one interviews with the women, and I ask them, let's reflect back to what we talked about at the very start. Now, share with me what's happened and where do you think you've been able to make a difference? And so that's where we connect back to the monetary values. And what I learned from every single woman in this program, every single woman said to me that what she gained from the program is she started to recognize that she wasn't alone. So they would come to these group coaching sessions and they would start to recognize that they were not the only one who felt that when they were in team meetings with their other colleagues, that when they raised an idea, sometimes their voice wasn't heard. So they started to recognize they weren't the only one that felt that. So they started to say things like, I started to realize I'm not the only one who doesn't feel like her voice is heard when she's in a team meeting. Or I'm not the only one who has to try to balance all of this work along with feeding my family at 6 o'clock at night, and who has to rush home and miss other meetings that might happen after work. I learned I'm not the only one that sometimes feels I have to work harder to demonstrate why I should work on a certain project. So they started to recognize that the issues that they faced individually were not about them personally, but it was really about the general issue that they face, partly because of their gender. And so because of that, what happened was they all told me they had more confidence to take those leaps, to work harder, to press harder in conversations where they had to negotiate. And that is what allowed them to make some of these monetary impacts, is through their negotiation skills, because they had more confidence. The other thing they told me that they did is that they started amplifying the contributions of others. So in the past, they'd go to meetings where somebody would say something, other people would maybe acknowledge what she was saying. Now what they would do is one woman would say something and somebody else in the team would then amplify her contributions. So big changes that they made as a result of coming together for those group coaching sessions, learning some of this content, and then thinking about the ways that they apply it. Let me just go to the last slide on the ROI, and then I'll pause for a couple of questions.
Yes, because we do have some.
I bet so. So the last one, this is the overall ROI. So now you know why I say, ROI is just one number. So ROI is just one number on this one slide. The entire slide deck of this final report is 61 slides, and the final narrative report is 85 pages. And yet, the ROI is only one number. It's one piece of it. I always say it's like the tip of the iceberg, but the entire story of success, it's the narrative backed up with the data, just like I explained when I was telling that story. So on this slide, you see the overall monetary impact. It's really, really high. The reason it's so high is we had one woman in this program who was able to save $17.6 million for this company because she pressed on and worked so hard to negotiate a contract that allowed them to save that amount of money. So that's part of why it looks so high. Overall, the sponsor was really happy, believed the number. We gave him an opportunity to debate the number, and he said, nope, I think this is the number, and he reinvested for this year in this program, grew the budget for my client, and so a big success story all around for everybody. So now let's pause and hear and see what questions you have. Karen, I think I'll look to you to see what questions we have. I can answer a couple here. So somebody is asking, was this a group coaching program? Yes, all 12 women came together. There were some micro-learning elements to the program, but then, and a lot of that was available to them through an online portal. So in other words, they self-paced, or they went through that content on their own, and then they came together as a group and they spoke about some of the specific topics as a group. And the group sessions were facilitated as a group coaching by a professional coach.
And I was speaking, but I was on mute.
Oh, okay.
Anita had asked on the midpoint, how was that quantified? The midpoint of the data.
The midpoint, how is it quantified? So let me show you the midpoint. So this is the midpoint. This is the scale that we have over here. So this isn't the only thing that we captured at the midpoint, but this is the slide that I shared with you. So the scale is, they could rate themselves as no new change, some change, or significant change. And so what the women are reporting here is that they're having at least some change on these two items, taking leaps and communicating authentically. It looks a little bit different than the endpoint because we had a little more than half of the participants participated in the midpoint, but not 100%. So the data changes a little bit by the end of the program.
The other question is savings from program participants. Was this endorsed by the finance and accounting?
It was.
Okay.
Oh, it was endorsed by the sponsor who has P&L responsibility for this team. And so the way the stories were shared, or the way the evidence was shared back to the sponsor, is that every woman who had a financial impact as a result of what they gained from the program, that was shared back to the sponsor one by one. He had the opportunity to debate or question, and then he also had the opportunity to debate or question the final ROI. And his decision was to accept the number. He was happy with the number to the degree that he reinvested in the program this year as well, and he grew the budget for the program. And he invited 15 other people within the organization to come hear the story of success of this program. So, that I think those actions that he took, I think illustrate his level of commitment to this overall work. We fully acknowledge there is some degree of estimation in the work that we're doing. We're fully acknowledge that. And this is really, one of the few options that we have, or ways that we can somehow connect what they're gaining from the program to a monetary value.
Okay. Viji has asked, is this 4-digit ROI signed off by the client? And the comment is, usually when benefits are generated, there are many who make a claim on their contribution to the benefit.
I think I just answered that question right before, where I was talking about how it was presented back to the sponsor, and he had the opportunity to debate or question it, and he didn't. He accepted these numbers. So, and then, the proof of that is really the fact that he reinvested in the program, expanded the budget for the program, and then invited 15 of his peers and colleagues throughout the organization to come and hear more about the program. So I think, all of those things, the fact that verbally he accepts it, but then also he takes the action to reinvest, grow the budget, invite others, really speaks volumes about his level of acceptance of this number.
2 other questions. One is, what is the length of the program from start to the ROI measurement?
This program, I believe, was 6 months long.
Okay. The other question is, hearing about real expenses, reducing real expenses is key to the metric. Is there another quantitative way other than reducing expenses?
In this one, and mostly because this was a team, this team, so they didn't all come from different parts of the organization. They all came from one team, and what they work on typically is around reducing costs. You can make an argument that some of them, no, that's not true. I'm just thinking back now, reflecting if that's true. In other situations with the technology team, this was not true of this team, but other technology teams, sometimes what they're doing is they're creating marketing technology. So what they're doing is they're trying to drive more visits to the website, which have a conversion rate, and then they can look at revenues coming in. That was not the situation of the women who were on this team. So that's why I think all of the monetary values on this one were all about reducing costs. It's just the nature of their work, what they're able to impact.
Okay, great. And we have Michael Cullen. He has a question. Go ahead, Michael.
Hi, Lisa Ann.
Oh.
Hi, can you hear me all right?
Yes, I can.
Great. Wonderful presentation. Bottom line, of course, the monetary value has to be there, but oftentimes coaching is brought in not for necessarily that, but more for performance coaching. Mm-hmm. So the idea of, how can we reduce stress? How can we reduce absenteeism as opposed to bottom line expense management? How can we get higher performers to work harder, longer to drive sales? It's actually now, I see a large movement to employee retention. Mm-hmm. And I'm just wondering if the return on investment can also be measured in that sense.
Sure. Sure. And by the way, let me just say one thing. I noticed now that I put this is the first time I ever put this link here on the slide. And I noticed, what did I forget but the .com. So it's lisaannedwards.com/download. And I just typed it in the chat window. That will take you to the case study if anybody is looking for that. I apologize for that. Okay, absolutely on the retention, absolutely. In fact, if you remember at the very start, I was saying, one full report can be repurposed in multiple ways, and I was talking about sales, coaching. So I ran a program one time. It was a coaching program, mentor coaching program for a sales organization where they had really high turnover. They had 72% turnover of their salespeople. It's a really, really hard sales environment. And we developed a mentor coaching program where the senior reps learned some mentoring skills, coaching skills, and they mentored the junior reps. And it resulted in improving retention. And so with the support and help of the internal HR person, we were able to put a monetary value on the savings due to retention. So absolutely you can. Key to our approach is we don't tell the client what the numbers are. We ask the questions and let the client tell us what the numbers are, and we reflect that back to them. And so, same thing in the retention. We don't tell them this is what your cost of turnover is. We ask them, how do you calculate the cost of your turnover? What value do you put on it? And so we capture those numbers from them. That leaves us out of the seat of being the authority on what their monetary values are. We don't know what their monetary values are. They have the best access to that.
I think that's a point well taken and clarifying. Thank you.
Yeah.
There's another question on, did the organization do anything else alongside coaching which could have influenced, supported, or accelerated the outcome from coaching?
They did not. They didn't do anything. There wasn't anything else going on at this time. And that's a great question, but there just wasn't anything else going on in this time, aside from the fact that they all had incredibly busy, hectic work schedules.
Okay. That seems to be all the questions for now.
All right. Very good. So let me go forward. I'm looking at the time, and it looks like we are close to the end of the time here. So let me just touch upon this. You are welcome to be in touch with me following our conversation here today. Let me just type my email address in here so that you have it in case you want to, only because we're coming up on time here. So coaching goals are typically things like people want greater self-awareness, or somebody says somebody needs greater self-awareness, or they want greater innovation, or they want greater work-life balance, or they want to communicate better. So the trick is, how do we connect that to a monetary goal? So we use this Money Talk framework. This is the Money Talk framework. It is just like a coaching contracting conversation. You facilitate these conversations all the time. So it's just a little bit more about digging into what's the ripple effect and can you put a monetary value on it. So we start off by asking about the current state. This is typically what you're learning about when somebody's coming to coaching. What's going on? What is the pain point? What's your aspiration? Why is this an issue for you? And then we go to the future state. So what's your goal? What would you like to have happen? That begins to frame up how we're going to work with them in a coaching engagement. Then we start to ask the question, so what would be the ripple effect for that for you if you were to make that change? What would be the result of that? And then can we put a specific monetary value on it? So in other words, we just start to get a sense of, okay, is that going to help you save time? Is it going to help the team be more profitable? Do you think you're going to be more efficient? We start to get a sense of what's the general area that this ripple effect might happen. And then can we put a monetary value on it? And then we check back for understanding. Very simple, straightforward. Again, just like your coaching contracting conversation. And that is how we make the connection. So Karen, I'm going to pause here because we're at 8:01.
Well, no, we're fine. You actually can go for another 15 minutes.
Oh, that's right. Because we started at 7:15. I was thinking, how did we get through that so fast? It's the time. It's because we start a quarter after, and I'm used to starting right on the hour or at the half hour.
Right.
So let me share a couple of examples with you. So I have three examples. In the first example, this individual was working, was a virtual manager. He is a virtual manager. So he works out of his home office, and then he manages a team who are all working in other areas as well. He doesn't have a clear line of sight to those individuals. And what was happening for him at the time is that he was micromanaging the team because he didn't trust that they would deliver what they needed to deliver in the right way. And so he was actually duplicating the efforts of his team. At the start, he told me that he was spending anywhere from 15 to 20 hours a week duplicating the efforts of his team. And so then at the end of coaching, then I asked him to reflect back on where he was at the start and what had changed for him. And what had changed for him is that he had created more structures and ways of managing his team better so that he wasn't micromanaging them. He also just genuinely trusted them more, which was a piece of what was going on for him. And he reported that he was spending less time micromanaging or duplicating the efforts of his team. He estimated he was spending about 5 to 10 hours. And so we put a monetary value on his time savings based upon what he told me in terms of what he thought he would be able to do in terms of sustaining that change. And that's how we were able to put a monetary value on that, by looking at his hourly rate. So that was the first one. The second one is an individual, same organization. It sounds fairly similar. She was also stressed out. She was doing the work of her team, but she was doing the work of her team for a different reason. She didn't have the courage and the confidence to set high expectations for her team and then to hold them accountable. She was being too nice. And so she was working on being bolder with her team, being more direct, setting being a little bit tougher on them, setting higher expectations, and then holding her team accountable. And so at the start of this, she told me that she was spending 10 hours a week actually doing the work of her team. So not duplicating the efforts of her team, but doing her team's work, because she wasn't challenging them enough. By the end of the program, she had built her confidence. She was tougher with her team. She actually changed her team dynamics around a little bit, changed some of the structure of her team. She was only spending 2 hours a week doing the work that her team should be doing. So big improvement for her. Same thing around how we put a monetary value on it. She gave me a sense of how long she thought she could sustain this change. And then we put a monetary value around it based upon her value of her time. Finally, one more, another individual. This is from the same organization. This person was an account manager for a professional services firm. So her job was to maintain the relationship with the account. It was a very large Fortune 500 organization. So she was responsible for maintaining the relationship of the client. Then she had a team of service providers who worked on that project. The way their dynamic was set up is that, or the way the responsibilities were set up is that she was the one who was responsible for maintaining the relationship with the client, keeping the budget in place, and also looking for additional opportunities where they might provide additional services within that account. What she wanted to do is to create greater innovation, and she knew that she had to lift revenue. She wasn't exactly sure how this would all play out. But what she did is she took some concepts around innovation, empowering the team, making it okay to fail, and giving permission to the team to explore additional opportunities. And what happened is that the people on her team who were never responsible for revenue actually identified 3 new projects within that client account that resulted in almost $1 million of additional revenue to that company. So $822,670 of new revenue is how we were able to put a monetary value on that. So there's an example. So you've got 3 examples of how we connect coaching goals, things that seem to be soft, like innovation, work-life balance, micromanaging, and connecting that to some kind of measure that we can put a monetary value around.
Now, Lisa, there are 2 questions.
Yes.
Similar. One is, please advise how much duration do you take calculate the savings since the savings is ongoing? And the other
Mm-hmm.
question is similar on time. How do
Right.
you calculate the monetary value of time saved since, in the future, you're going to be calculating it? So when is the beginning and end point is really the
Mm-hmm.
essence of both questions.
So let me use these examples. So what I do is I ask them, how long do you think you can sustain this change? And based on their answer, that's what I use for a time frame. How long do you think you can sustain this change? I think most people are realistic, or at least it's been my experience that they're realistic. They don't say things like for 3 years or 2 years or anything like that. They usually are somewhere within the current year time frame. But again, I ask them to, how long do you think you can sustain this change? How long do you think this change has been in place? And how long do you think you can sustain it? And that's what I use as a basis for timing. I think there was another question around that. In this program, these people were all part of one program, and this was a 10-month long program. It was supposed to be 9 months, but they extended it an additional month just due to some things that were going on in their organization. So it ended up being 10 months.
Okay, so the other question was around savings.
Mm-hmm.
So when is the end point for savings since savings is ongoing? Do you ask them the
I
question?
asked them. So I asked them, how long do you think you can sustain this change? How long do you think you've been able to make this change? How long has this improvement been going on? And how long do you think you can sustain it? And that's what I use as a basis. And I take notes on all of that. By the way, in this example that I'm sharing with you, my sponsor was the CFO. And so at the end of this project, I had to share back. And the reason they hired me was because I could capture data all throughout. I had case studies that illustrated how I capture data all throughout, including the financial impact data. And that's why they hired me. The person who hired me was the CFO and the acting CEO. The CEO was an individual who was from a private equity firm who had invested in this company, and he was the acting CEO at the time. I actually had to interview with him and share my past work with him. He together with the CFO, made the decision to invest in what I could provide to them. And then in the end, I had to share the data back with all of the senior executives. I had to go through each one of the monetary links with the CFO. She questioned some of the measures. She would give me questions. I had to go back to the participant and ask them some additional questions to satisfy her. But then in the end, she signed off. And actually, she calculated the ROI for me, to be perfectly transparent. She calculated the ROI because she had a spreadsheet, and she looked at all the numbers, and she made decisions on things. She made some final decisions on things like, I think we had somebody in the program who managed a team, and some of their measures were things around profitability and team utilization. And those are numbers they track on a regular basis. So she made some decisions on some of those final numbers as well. So in the end, I mean, it had a pretty tough final review, but it all went through. I still work together with her. She refers business to me on a regular basis. And so, she was pretty happy with the final product.
Yeah, there are two questions here around, do you charge separately for carrying out the ROI measure? And I think it's similar. Do you charge your professional cost to measure ROI?
That's a good question. So typically what I do, this is how I got started. And I think I alluded to this in the very beginning. I never wanted to get into coaching because I thought it was fluffy. People asked me to coach them, and I wouldn't even charge anything. This was way back in 1999. I wouldn't even charge anything because at that time, it wasn't really a clear profession. And I thought it was very fluffy. I thought it was just like being a friend. I'm from the Midwest. And, you sit down and you spend time with people. You listen to them. And you acknowledge them, so to ask somebody to pay me to do that, it didn't fit for me. And so, the way I got into this was by having data and evidence. So I took my Bloom Where You're Planted, Finding Purpose in Your Work and Life, took it as a pilot study, tracked data, had evidence, had information on employee retention that I could share back. And so the reason I'm saying that is, the reason I'm telling you that insight or giving you that insight is that the idea of selling myself, it would be incredibly hard for me. It's not in my DNA to try to sell or promote myself. Even today, I have a hard time, promoting what I do. But what's easy for me to do, what's easy for me to sell is the results. It's really, really easy for me to talk about the case studies. It's really, really easy to talk about the data and evidence that illustrates the impact that we had. And so because of that, I used that as a way to sell business when I first started my business. If I had to rely on selling myself, I don't think I could have done it. I couldn't have been successful. But because I had case studies that had data and evidence, I had all the confidence I needed to sell my work, because it wasn't about me, it was about the results of this work. So that's a little background on that. So somebody asked about, do I charge for it? So this is my long-winded way of giving you that answer. So in the beginning, I never charged for it. I did it because I needed to have it, because that's how I could sell my next project, or that's how I could retain my client. So I did it out of personal need. Now I do charge for it. Typically what I do, and I did this more in the early days, where I would offer a full solution. In the early days, I sold a lot of leadership development and mentor coaching programs, and I would give them two options. I'd say, here's option A. Option A is the full meal deal. It's the most expensive option, and I'll do all of the data measures. I'll include that as a value-added service at no additional cost. And then in exchange for that, I'd like to be able to use this as a case study. So I'd offer that as option A. Option B would be much more scaled back, lower budget, still a solid program, but more scaled back. And then I would not include any of the data capture as a value-added service. If they wanted me to do it, I would do it, but I would charge for it. I never had one instance where they picked option B. They always wanted option A. So it helped me also secure larger projects. All right. I see some questions. I see Marin's asking, what's about the ratio of time? So I've never tracked the amount of time that I spend on this, and partially because it's such a key piece to my whole differentiator. This is how I'm different from anybody in the marketplace, is that I capture all of this data. I always want it to be the best that it can be. I still use case studies I started my business in 2012. I still use case studies from 2012 and 2013, but I refine them and I improve them and I make them better. I'm always looking for better ways to tell the story, better narrative to tell the story, zoning in on some of those data points that illustrate different concepts. I have one case study where they had multiple elements to the program. So they had some micro-learning sessions, they had one-on-one coaching, they had coaching supervision, they had peer coaching, they had reading, and so on. They had all kinds of elements as a part of the full solution. And I captured data on what was the most value-added component. And the number one most value-added component was the one-on-one coaching with the coach, but it's also the most expensive. So I rely on that set of data on a regular basis when I'm selling, or when I'm talking, I'm in the sales process, to illustrate that while it's the most expensive element of the entire solution, it's the highest value add. So when they're thinking about their budgets and they want to trim their budget, the last place they want to trim their budget is around the one-on-one coaching, because it's the highest value add. So I end up using my data over and over and over again. So I don't know that I can say there's a really clear beginning and end point in terms of how much time it takes me to use the data, put the case studies together, because I'm constantly repurposing it.
Well, we've gotten great session. Yes, go back to the final slide. Any closing remarks, Lisa?
Just that I cannot believe I didn't put this .com on here. You know, I'm always looking at the numbers and all the other elements of I have never put my web address on here before. And so this is all brand new, and yet I missed the .com. So there I am. And I put that link there. If you want to learn a little bit more about the impact study, there's a link to that there in the chat window. You have my contact information. I am on social media if you want to connect with me there. I so appreciate the honor to be here with you on International Coaching Week. Thank you, Ram, for inviting me, and Magda, and for inviting me to be a part of this. Thank you for all of your wonderful questions. I always love seeing what you have to say. You made it an engaging, fun session for me. And Karen, thank you so much for your wonderful hosting today and making it so easy for all of us to join together.
Well, thank you.
Thank you very much, and hope to see you again. All the best.
All right. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Karen. Thanks, everyone. As a reminder, we are back here again tomorrow, same time, same place. Please take a look in the email I sent out a couple days ago for a full schedule. And we look forward to seeing you hopefully tomorrow and for the next few days. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Thanks, Magda. Bye.
Bye.